Jungkook, what are you doing here? Jungkook demanded, his voice sharp and filled with distrust. Sam exchanged a glance with Steve, both stepping aside to give Sarah space. Sam, she's got something you're going to want to see. Jungkook's jaw tightened as he shifted his attention fully to Sarah. Jungkook, if this is some kind of joke, he said, as he clearly knows Emily and Sarah are friends, what will she even do? Sarah, it's not, Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. I know what I'm doing. Emily might have been my friend, but she went too far. She deserves this. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Jungkook, what do you have? Sarah took a deep breath and unlocked her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled up a video. She handed it to Jungkook without a word, her lips pressed into a thin line. Jungkook snatched the phone, his movements deliberate as he began to watch the video. The corridor felt heavy with tension as the clear evidence unfolded on the screen. Emily's voice came through loud and clear as she discussed her plans to stage the photos and upload them. She mocked you in the footage, her words dripping with offense. Jungkook's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone tighter. But the satisfaction he felt was cold and stern. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about destroying Emily's manipulative personality. This was it. This would prove to you that he was innocent. Jungkook closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling sharply. He handed the phone back to Sarah without looking at her. Jungkook, send me the video, now. His voice was low, but the command in it was unmistakable. Sarah nodded quickly, her movements rushed as she fumbled to send the file. Sarah, I'll email it to you, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She deserves this, Sarah admitted, exhaling shakily. I knew about her plan. Emily's always had some serious issues with Yin, and I thought it was just jealousy. But now I see it's much worse. Sarah, I was at fault too, she began, her tone laced with regret. Even after knowing about the plan, I went along with it, a little. I didn't want to lose my friendship with her. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it wouldn't escalate this far. She took a deep breath, her hands tightening around her phone. But I know I'm wrong. I shouldn't have stayed silent. I should have stopped her before it got out of hand. She hesitated, then added quietly, Sarah, that's why I recorded this. I knew she was going too far, and I couldn't let her drag you and Yin down like this. At least now you have the proof to set things right. She needs to face the consequences, and so do I if it comes to that. She turned and walked away, guilt evident in her stiff posture. Jungkook shook his head in disbelief and didn't spare her another glance. His attention shifted to Sam and Steve, who stood nearby, looking like children caught red-handed. Jungkook, you both are in this video, Jungkook said coldly, his eyes narrowing as he stared them down. The two men exchanged nervous glances, their heads bowing under the weight of his glare. Sam swallowed hard before speaking, his voice barely audible. Sam, do whatever you want. Jungkook, we betrayed you, and we deserve whatever's coming. Jungkook scoffed, his lips curling into a mocking smile. Jungkook, deserve it, he repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. That's an understatement. You betrayed me, and now you're going to fix it. Steve looked up hesitantly. What do you want us to do? Jungkook took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Jungkook, upload this video to the same account Emily used. Make sure it's public. Let everyone see who she really is. The men froze, guilt and fear etched across their faces. Steve hesitated for a moment before nodding. Jungkook, good. Jungkook's smirk deepened, his eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. And when you're done, make sure everyone knows exactly who helped her. Don't think you'll get off easy. Sam and Steve nodded, their heads hanging low as they realized the full extent of their humiliation was yet to come. He wanted you to see the video first. He wanted you to know the truth before anyone else did. He didn't need words to convince you. The proof would speak for itself. The last lecture of the day came to an end as you quietly packed your bag. Your gaze wandered toward Jungkook's empty seat, and a sharp pang of guilt stabbed your chest. His absence only reminded you of the confrontation the night before. Yin, I shouldn't have slapped him. Maybe I went too far, you muttered under your breath, your fingers tightening around the strap of your bag. You shook your head, trying to push the thought away, but guilt clung to you like a heavy fog. Your eyes wandered to Emily, who sat uncomfortably in her chair. Her fidgeting caught your attention briefly, but when you noticed people giving her strange glances, you frowned. Something felt off, but you quickly dismissed it. Whatever drama she was dealing with wasn't your concern. You zipped your bag, ready to leave, when your phone dinged. Curious, You paused and unlocked it, only to frown deeper. Notifications filled your screen, each one stranger than the last. You blinked as the realization hit. They were apologies. Apologies? From the same people who had mocked you, whispered behind your back, and judged you just hours ago. One after another, the messages flooded in, each more apologetic than the last. Your mind instantly raced to one name, Jungkook. It had to be him, who did something to make this happen. But before you could process it fully, a loud scream pierced through the room, making you flinch. All heads turned toward the source. Your eyes followed the sound, landing on Emily, who was standing now, gripping her phone tightly, her face pale and twisted with panic. Emily, no, this isn't me. I didn't. How the F did this get uploaded? Who did this? Her voice broke as she screamed again, her panic only fueling the murmurs and laughter from the students around her. Random students started whispering, making her blood boil. You deserve this, Emily. Pathetic BH. A few more laughed, and another chimed in. No, desperate BH is more accurate. Emily banged her fist against the desk, her anger exploding. Emily, shut the F up. Just shut up, all of you. Her voice cracked as she turned toward one of the students holding their phone. The person grinned smugly, showing her the screen. Emily's reaction was immediate. Another scream, louder and more desperate. You watched the scene unfold, your heart pounding. What could they possibly be showing her? Your phone chimed again, pulling your attention back. With trembling fingers, you opened the latest notification. It was a link to Instagram. A video. Your pulse quickened as you tapped on it. The video began to play, and within seconds, your eyes widened in shock. Emily's voice was unmistakable. The video showed her sitting with Sam and Steve, clearly plotting. Emily in the video. I don't care what it takes. She needs to be humiliated. Let's take the photos. It'll ruin her completely. The coldness in her tone made your stomach churn. You had already knew the truth that Jungkook wasn't at fault, but hearing Emily's confession made it undeniable. A wave of guilt washed over you, crashing hard and leaving you breathless. You felt terrible for doubting Jungkook again, for the way you had lashed out at him, and for the slap that still lingered in your memory like a heavy weight on your conscience. But alongside the guilt, anger boiled within you. Eyes darted between you and Emily, curiosity written all over their faces, maybe waiting for some drama. Your hands clenched into fists at your sides as you stared at Emily, who was now trembling in her spot. Emily's eyes darted nervously around the room, her face pale. The weight of everyone's judgment bore down on her, and for a brief moment, she froze. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, she shoved her chair back with a loud screech. Without saying a word, she grabbed her bag and bolted for the door. Her steps were hurried and unsteady as she pushed past students, avoiding their piercing gazes. The room buzzed with murmurs as everyone watched her flee, some laughing mockingly, others shaking their heads. Jungkook leaned against your locker, absent-mindedly playing with the keychain hanging there. His sharp gaze occasionally darted toward the hallway, anticipating your arrival. The classes were over, and he was certain you must have seen the video by now. He couldn't deny the nervous energy coursing through him, though he masked it with his usual calm exterior. A faint sound of hurried footsteps caught his attention, and his head snapped up, his heart briefly racing at the thought it might be you. The anticipation vanished as he saw Emily instead, huffing and running down the hall. Jungkook's eyes narrowed as he watched her approach. He already knew why she was like this. The video must have spread, and her dirty secrets were no longer hidden. Emily froze when her gaze landed on him, her face contorted in fear and shame, knowing the person she'd been trying to manipulate was now fully aware of her lies. She lowered her head, attempting to avoid eye contact, and quickened her steps, hoping to rush past him unnoticed. But Jungkook wasn't about to let her go that easily. His jaw tightened as his mind replayed the scene from the video. The way she mocked you, schemed against you without a shred of guilt. His anger, which he had been holding back all day, surged to the surface. With purposeful strides, he closed the distance between them and grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back roughly. Emily gasped in pain and stumbled, her wide eyes meeting his dark, enraged ones. Jungkook, running away. Are we? His voice was low, icy, and laced with venom. It wasn't the Jungkook she knew from far, the calm, distant Jungkook who rarely got involved in drama. This was a different side of him, one that sent a chill down her spine. Emily, Jungkook, wait, please, just listen. This isn't what it looks like, I swear. Her words tumbled out in a frantic stammer, her hands weakly clawing at his wrist as she tried to free herself. But Jungkook wasn't listening. Instead, he tilted his head, letting out a humorless, mocking chuckle. Jungkook, not what it looks like. So, you weren't sitting there in that video, plotting to humiliate Yin? You didn't say you wanted to ruin her completely. Explain that to me, Emily. I'm curious. His grip on her hair tightened slightly, making her wince. Tears welled in her eyes, but Jungkook's cold stare remained fixed on her, unrelenting. Emily, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted. His voice cut through her excuses like a blade. Emily flinched at the harshness of his tone, her words dying in her throat. Jungkook, you wanted Yin humiliated. You wanted everyone to turn against her. How does it feel now, Emily? How does it feel to be the one everyone's looking at? To be the one they're laughing at? Emily, I'll fix it. I'll delete everything. I'll do whatever you want. Jungkook, just let me go. Jungkook scoffed, finally releasing her with a shove. Emily stumbled back, clutching her head and staring at him with a mix of fear and desperation. Emily opened her mouth to plead again, but Jungkook wasn't interested. He stepped closer. Jungkook, you're pathetic, Emily. And trust me, this is just the beginning of what's coming for you. With that, he turned on his heel, his fists clenched as he stormed off. His mind was no longer on Emily. She wasn't worth another second of his time. His thoughts were consumed with you. He needed to find you, to see your face, and to finally make you understand that his heart had always been yours. Jungkook stepped into the classroom, his mind racing with thoughts of you. When you hadn't left at your usual time, he'd felt a pang of worry. Now, as he scanned the empty room, his gaze landed on a lone figure seated on the last bench. His heart clenched when he realized it was you. You sat with your head lowered, shoulders slightly hunched, lost in your thoughts. Jungkook's jaw tightened as he debated what to do. Should he give you space, or should he approach you now, unable to wait any longer? His need to know, to see if you had seen the video and understood the truth, overpowered his hesitation. He took a slow breath and stepped forward, the sound of his footsteps filling the silence. You didn't notice him at first, too consumed by your messed up emotions, but as the sound grew closer, you instinctively lifted your head. Your heart skipped a beat when your eyes met his. His expression was unreadable, a mix of desperation and vulnerability. Your fingers began to fidget nervously, and you blinked rapidly, your mind crawling for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. The classroom was empty, and you felt smaller and smaller in his gaze. Jungkook stopped a few feet away, his gaze locked on you. He clenched his fists to steady himself, his emotions threatening to spill over. Jungkook, Yin. His voice was soft, but the vulnerability behind it was heavy enough to make your chest tighten. He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Did you see the video? You swallowed hard, the question hitting you like a wave. You couldn't meet his eyes anymore, your guilt too overwhelming. Slowly, you nodded, squeezing your eyes shut as though it would erase the pain of facing him. Jungkook's heart sank at your reaction. He wanted to feel relief that you finally knew the truth, but the sight of you so quiet and guarded made his chest ache. Jungkook, then you know, I didn't do it. I never wanted to hurt you, Yin. His voice cracked slightly, but he held his ground, waiting for you to respond. You bit your lip, willing yourself to speak, but the words felt stuck. You knew he was innocent from the start, and now the video had left no room for doubt. But the weight of everything you had endured, the whispers, the stares, the humiliation clung to you like chains. Yin, I'm sorry. The words barely left your lips, but they were enough to make Jungkook take a step closer. He crouched slightly to meet your gaze, his brows furrowing as he tried to read your expression. Jungkook, don't apologize, Yin. You didn't do anything wrong. I need to know what you're thinking. You lifted your head, your eyes shimmering with unshed tears as you finally met his gaze. Jungkook, you know, right? You saw it wasn't my fault. Baby, I was framed. You know I only love you. His words came out rushed, almost pleading, but your silence cut through him like a knife. His brows furrowed as frustration began to bubble inside him. Jungkook, Yin, say something, please. Do you still not trust me? Your lips parted slightly as if to respond, but no sound came out. His frustration deepened, and he crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to your level. Gently but firmly, he cupped your face in his hands, forcing you to meet his gaze. Jungkook, baby, what's wrong? Did Emily say something to you again? Just tell me, whatever it is, I'll handle it. I'll take care of everything. You just need to trust me. Tears pricked the corners of your eyes as you blinked rapidly, trying to keep them away. His concern and love made your heart ache even more. You opened your mouth to speak, but the words felt like poison on your tongue. Finally, you took a shaky breath and whispered, Yin, I don't feel like we should continue this. Jungkook. The room fell deathly silent as your words echoed around you. Jungkook froze, his hands slipping from your face as if you'd burned him. Jungkook. What? His voice was barely audible, filled with disbelief and hurt. You couldn't look at him. Instead, you stared down at your lap, wishing the ground would swallow you whole. Yin. I feel like we're not a good match. Look at you, Jungkook, and look at me. People judge us. And you choked on the words, your heart breaking with every word. Before you could say more, a loud bang made you flinch. Jungkook's fist had slammed into the table beside you, the sound echoing through the room. Your eyes shot up to see his face twisted in a mix of anger, pain, and frustration. Jungkook, that's how it is now. That's what you think of us? After everything I've done for you, after everything we've been through, you think we're not a good match? His voice was louder now, his emotions spilling over like a dam breaking. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps before turning back to you. Jungkook, how many times do I have to tell you that I love you, that I only want you? Do you think I care about what anyone else says, about their opinions? He crouched down again, his eyes boring into yours with a fiery intensity. Jungkook, no Yin, the only person who matters to me is you. But clearly, that's not enough for you. Clearly, I'm not enough for you. Your tears finally spilled over, streaming down your face as guilt and regret consumed you. Jungkook, you know what hurts the most? It's not even what they said. It's the fact that you believed them. You let their words get to you, and now you're throwing us away because of it. Do you have any idea how that feels? His voice cracked at the end, and he stood up abruptly, running a hand over his face as he tried to compose himself. When he looked back at you, his expression was hardened, but his eyes betrayed the depth of his pain. Jungkook, fine, you want to end this? Then I'll make it easy for you. I won't come to you anymore. I won't beg or fight for someone who won't fight for us. His words hit you like a loaded train, leaving you breathless. If you want me, if you think we're worth it, then you come to me. Otherwise, this is goodbye. Jungkook, Yin, I just don't want you to fight for us. I want you to fight for yourself. Your breath hitched as his words sank in, his tone soft but firm, almost pleading. Jungkook, do you even realize how much you mean to me? How much I love you? You keep comparing yourself to others, letting their words tear you down, but you don't see what I see. You don't see yourself the way I do. His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on, his words flowing like a confession he had been holding in for far too long. Jungkook, I want you to know that you have to love yourself first, Yin. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for you. Because you deserve that. You deserve to look in the mirror and see the incredible person that I see every single day. He leaned closer, his voice trembling with emotion as he caressed your hair. Jungkook, I don't care what anyone else says. In my eyes, you're the most beautiful person I've ever known, the most beautiful human, not just on the outside, but in here. He placed a hand over his heart, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears as he looked at you with a tenderness that broke your resolve. Your vision blurred as tears streamed down your face, his words piercing through every layer of self-doubt you had carried for so long. Jungkook, I never thought we'd end things like this. I never thought you'd let other people's words break what we built together. But if this is what you want, he stepped back, his eyes lingering on you for a moment longer, as if memorizing every detail. With those final words, he turned and walked away, leaving you sitting there in stunned silence, your heart shattering under the weight of his love and the reality of your own fears. You sat there, tears streaming down your face, feeling the weight of his words pressing heavily on your chest. Each one echoed in your mind, cutting deeper than you thought possible. You had hurt him, and worse, you had let your insecurities hurt the one person who believed in you unconditionally. Your hands trembled as you buried your face in them, the sobs escaping uncontrollably. The realization of what you had just done overwhelmed you like a tidal wave. Yin, what have I done? You clenched your fists tightly, anger bubbling up, not at him, not at anyone else, but at yourself, at the doubts, the fears, and the insecurities you had let control you. Yin, I need to fix this. I can't let it end like this. I should never have broken the trust he has in me. You whispered shakily, You wiped your tears hastily with the back of your hands, your determination slowly overpowering the sadness that gripped your heart. Yin. But before I can face him, I need to make the situation right. Your resolve hardened as you thought about the events that had spiraled out of control. Emily's schemes, the lies, the humiliation. You couldn't confront Jungkook with this mess looming over you both. You had to clear the air, to confront the people who had pushed you into this corner. Taking a deep breath, you grabbed your bag, your steps shaky but resolute as you left the empty classroom. Your feet carried you to the chancellor's office with a determination you hadn't felt before. You didn't knock. You opened the door boldly. Inside, the chancellor looked up from his desk, his expression shifting to one of concern when he noticed your red, swollen eyes. For a brief moment, he hesitated, wondering if you were here to report a ragging incident or some other trouble. Miss Yin, he said gently, gesturing for you to take a seat. Please, come in. What seems to be the problem? You stood still for a second, gathering your thoughts, before stepping forward and sitting down. Your voice, though quiet, carried a weight that filled the room. Yin, sir, may I have a few minutes of your time? There's something you need to see. He nodded, leaning slightly forward. Of course, what happened? Without speaking, you reached into your bag and pulled out your phone. Unlocking it, you navigated to the video, the one that had shaken your world. Sliding the phone across the desk, you said firmly, Yin, please watch this. The chancellor picked up the phone, his brows furrowing as he focused on the video. The audio played clearly, and the sinister intent behind the conversation was clear. Emily's voice was full of hate as she spoke, and it was clear she had planned everything. She wasn't just trying to embarrass you, she wanted to ruin you completely. She talked about taking photos and spreading them around, all to make sure your reputation was destroyed. It wasn't just a careless act. Emily had carefully thought out every part of her plan, hoping to break you down and make you feel worthless. The chancellor's face tightened as the video ended. It was clear now that Emily had done this on purpose, and her actions were far worse than just a simple mistake. What she did needed serious punishment, and he was ready to make sure she faced the consequences. Yin, do I need to say more? You asked, your voice quiet but sharp. He shook his head. No, you don't. Don't worry. I'll handle this. You shook your head firmly, leaning forward. Yin, no sir, not later, right now, in front of me. He studied you for a moment, seeing the fire in your eyes. With a curt nod, he picked up his phone and called his staff. Bring Emily, Sam, and Steve to my office immediately, he instructed. Minutes passed like hours. The tension in the room was thick. You sat in silence, your hands gripping the edge of the chair, waiting. Finally, the door opened, and the three culprits walked in. Emily looked pale, her eyes darting nervously between you and the chancellor. Sam and Steve stood behind her, their expressions uneasy but less panicked. The chancellor wasted no time. He folded his hands on the desk and addressed them coldly. Do you know why you've been called here? Emily fidgeted, avoiding eye contact. Emily, and no sir, she stammered. The chancellor's gaze sharpened. I've seen the video. Your actions are unacceptable. As of this moment, I'm contacting your parents to inform them of your suspension and expulsion. Emily froze, her face draining of all color. Emily, no please sir, she cried, stepping forward. You can't involve my parents. They'll disown me. Please, I'll do anything. Just don't call them. The chancellor remained unmoved. You should have thought about that before engaging in such behavior. Miss Emily. Emily's panic turned to desperation. Her gaze snapped to you, her lips trembling. She hesitated before doing the unthinkable. She dropped to her knees in front of you. Emily, Yin, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Her voice was choked with sobs as she clasped her hands together. Please stop this. I'll never do anything like this again. I swear on my life. Just tell him not to call my parents. Sam and Steve stood silently in the corner, their faces pale. They knew they might escape with suspensions, but Emily's fate was far worse. You stood from your chair, towering over her. She looked up at you with tear-filled eyes, searching for mercy, but there was none to be found. Your voice was calm, yet icy. Yin, why would I stop this, Emily? When this, you gestured around the room, your eyes narrowing. This is exactly what I want. Her face crumbled, and she sobbed harder, her cries echoing in the office. The weight of her actions and the consequences that followed bore down on her shoulders. For the first time, Emily realized the gravity of what she had done. There was no escape now. Yin, this is the result of your actions, Emily. No one deserves to be treated like that, not like you tried to do to me. You paused, your gaze unwavering. I hope you learned something from this. Without another word, you turned and walked out of the office, leaving them all behind. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in the silent room, making Emily realize that there was no escape. You leaned against your locker, lost in thought as the guilt of hurting Jungkook weighed heavily on you. Your mind raced, trying to come up with ways to fix things. You glanced at the time on your phone, realizing it was Tuesday, a day Jungkook usually spent in the practice area. After the class, a thought struck you. He was likely there now, playing aggressively to vent his frustrations. If he wasn't in the court, he'd be resting in the changing room. A flicker of hope pushed you forward, and without wasting a moment, you decided to take the risk. Your steps quickened as you neared the door of the changing room. The faint sound of laughter and chatter filtered through the walls, but you didn't hesitate. You pushed the door open, your desperation carrying you through despite your fluttering nerves. The sight inside made you freeze. The room was alive with movement. Several men were half-dressed, some stretching, others chatting, while a few were finishing their workouts. A wave of heat rose to your cheeks as the entire room fell silent, heads turning toward you in surprise. Your gaze darted around until it landed on him. Jungkook. He was sitting on a bench near the back, a towel draped over his shoulder and a water bottle in hand. His sharp jawline glistened with sweat, and his dark hair clung to his forehead. For a moment, his eyes met yours, and you thought you saw a flicker of something, relief, curiosity, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He looked away, tipping his water bottle and taking a long sip, his body language showing coldness. You blinked, your throat tightening. His silent rejection hit harder than you expected, but you refused to back down. Bowing your head slightly, you mumbled. Before you could turn to leave, sudden amused voices erupted around the room. Hey, no need to leave, sister-in-law. One of the men called out, grinning. Another chimed in with a playful smirk. Yeah, Jungkook's all yours. We were just about to head out anyway. Laughter rippled through the group, and you felt your cheeks flush even deeper. Jungkook, on the other hand, stiffened. He choked slightly on the water he had been sipping and glared at his friends with a look that could kill. The teasing only grew. A few men smirked as they grabbed their towels and began filing out of the room, throwing knowing glances between the two of you. As the last one left, the door clicked shut, leaving you alone with Jungkook. You stood there awkwardly, your fingers fidgeting with the hem of your shirt. Jungkook didn't move from his spot, his gaze fixed on his tasks as if you weren't even there. He sat on the edge of the bench, his body tense as he pretended to adjust his bag. It was clear he was trying to look busy, to ignore your presence altogether, but you could see through his act. The ache in your chest grew heavier, but you knew you couldn't back down. Taking a deep breath, you stepped closer, hesitating for just a moment before lowering yourself onto the bench beside him. The space was so narrow that your thighs almost touched, leaving him no room to escape. Jungkook shifted, trying to create space, his shoulders stiffening further. But still, he said nothing. You glanced at him, your eyes searching his face for any hint of softness. But his expression was hard, cold even. It was totally different from the warmth you were so used to seeing in his eyes, and it broke something inside you. Gathering your courage, you reached out, your trembling fingers lightly gripping the edge of his jacket sleeve. Jungkook, I'm sorry. You spoke, your voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, didn't even flinch. It was as if your words had fallen on deaf ears, but you pressed on, desperate to break through the wall he'd put up. I know I hurt you, you continued, your voice trembling with emotion, and I hate myself for it. I didn't mean what I said, I swear, Jungkook. I don't want to end things. I don't want to lose you. Still, he remained silent, his gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Your chest tightened, and tears threatened to spill over as you reached for his hand. Slowly, you intertwined your fingers with his, bringing his hand to rest on your lap. You began tracing the lines of his knuckles with your fingertips, your touch gentle and hesitant. I love you, you whispered, your voice cracking. I love you more than anything. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle everything, and I said things I didn't mean, but please don't push me away. Jungkook let out a bitter scoff, his lips curling into a faint, humorless smile. Finally, he turned his head slightly to look at you, his gaze sharp and cold. Jungkook, so that's how it works now, he said, his tone low and biting. You get to decide when we're done and when we're not. Is this relationship just about what you want, His words cut deep, and you shook your head frantically, tears spilling down your cheeks. No, Jungkook, that's not what I meant. He pulled his hand back abruptly, breaking the contact, and the sudden emptiness in your lap made your heart sink. You tried to hold onto him, gripping his wrist tightly, but he was stronger. Yin, please, you pleaded, your voice breaking. Please listen to me. Jungkook leaned back slightly, his jaw clenched and his eyes burning with a mix of frustration and hurt. Jungkook, Yin, he said firmly, his voice cold and final. Leave, just leave. The words hit you like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, you couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down your face as you stared at him, your chest heaving with silent sobs, but you refused to move, you refused to give up. Yin, I'm not leaving, you said, your voice shaking but determined. Not until you hear me out. Not until you understand how sorry I am. Your words hung in the air, but Jungkook didn't even flinch. Instead, he stood up abruptly, like your presence didn't matter, and turned away from you. His expression was cold, his steps purposeful. As he headed outside towards the lockers, you bit your bottom lip hard, the sting hurting you as your heart ached at his indifference. But you'd made up your mind to fix things, no matter how hard it got. Without hesitation, you got up and followed him, your steps quickening to keep up with his long strides. He reached his locker, the sound of the metal door opening harsh against the quiet hum of the corridor. Jungkook rifled through his belongings, his back turned to you, completely ignoring your presence. You stopped a few feet behind him, watching his broad shoulders tense as he moved. Jungkook, you started softly, your voice trembling. No response. You stood a few feet behind him, your fingers nervously twisting the hem of your shirt. Your heart was heavy with guilt and desperation. You knew you had to try harder to make things right. Taking a shaky breath, you stepped forward, the words stuck in your throat. But instead of speaking, you acted. Without thinking twice, you walked up behind him and wrapped your arms around his waist, interlocking your fingers tightly to stop him from pushing you away. Jungkook froze. His entire body went rigid at the sudden contact. Your warmth against his back was so familiar, so comforting, that for a split second, he felt himself soften. But then his mind reminded him of the pain. He clenched his jaw, trying to ignore the way his heart raced. Jungkook, Yin, let go, he said, his voice steady but cold. You didn't move. Instead, you pressed your face against his back, your voice trembling as you spoke. Yin, no, I won't. Please, Jungkook, just listen to me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said. I regret everything. He took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions bubbling inside him. Your words were cracking the walls he had built, but he wasn't ready to let them fall just yet. Jungkook, Yin, he warned, his tone sharper now. Look, people are watching. He glanced around, noticing a few students at the far end of the corridor, their curious eyes fixed on the two of you. He reached down, trying to gently tug your hands apart, but you held on tighter, your fingers digging into his jacket. Yin, I don't care, you whispered fiercely. Let them watch. Let them think whatever they want. I just need you to forgive me. Your arms tightened around him, pulling him closer, and the unexpected pressure made him stumble slightly. His body leaned against the locker, and he let out a quiet sigh, his resolve faltering. He could feel your sincerity, your desperation, and it made his chest ache. Jungkook, are we going to stay like this forever? He asked, his voice cold but laced with a faint hint of teasing. You hesitated, loosening your hold slightly, afraid you might be hurting him. You stepped back just enough to let him turn his head to look at you. His dark eyes met yours, and for the first time, you saw a flicker of emotion, a crack in his cold demeanor. Yin, I reported Emily, you said softly, your voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. I told the Chancellor everything, and they will take further actions. Jungkook stilled, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. He hadn't expected that. He turned his body halfway to face you fully, his expression unreadable. Jungkook, you did? You nodded quickly, your hands fidgeting nervously. Yin, yes, I couldn't let her get away with what she did, not after everything she's done to us. For a moment, Jungkook didn't say anything. He simply stared at you, his eyes scanning your face. His shoulders relaxed ever so slightly, and he exhaled deeply, as though a weight had been lifted off his chest. Jungkook, good, he said simply, his tone neutral. The word wasn't exactly forgiving, but it wasn't dismissive either. It gave you a hope, and you clung to it desperately. Without another word, he closed his locker and turned to walk away. You stood frozen, staring at his back as he made his way out of the building. Your heart clenched, wanting to stop him, to call out, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, you whispered to yourself, your voice trembling with uncertainty. You whispered to yourself, barely audible, "Yin, will he not take me home today?" When he didn't stop or look back, your chest tightened. Without thinking, you followed him, your footsteps hesitant. You trailed behind him through the quiet corridors and out into the parking lot, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across you. Jungkook walked toward his car, his figure leaving you behind. You suddenly stopped in your tracks. For a moment, you thought he'd leave you there, stranded and alone. But then he did something unexpected. He opened the passenger side door and stood there, his back to you, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. Your heart fluttered with relief and confusion. Was this his way of extending a small hand? Was this his way of saying he still cared? You hesitated for only a second before breaking into a small, hurried jog. A giddy laugh bubbled up in your chest as you practically ran to the car. You slid into the passenger seat, your spirits lifting for the first time in hours. But just as quickly, your hope faltered when you noticed someone else approaching the driver's side. Jungkook's teammate, Max, came with a playful grin, and confusion washed over you. Max opened the driver's door and climbed in, glancing at you with a mischievous smirk. "Max, hey there, sister-in-law. Looks like I'm your ride today," he teased, buckling his seatbelt. Your jaw dropped, and you turned to look for Jungkook, panic rising in your chest. You spotted him walking toward another car a few feet away. "Yin, Jungkook, what's this? Why aren't you driving me home?" you called out, your voice trembling with a mix of frustration and hurt. He didn't stop. Without looking back, he simply said, "Drive safely, Max." Before getting into the car, Max gave him a thumbs up and started the engine. While you sat frozen in disbelief, anger surged through you as you turned sharply toward Max. "Yin, why is he doing this? What's wrong with him?" Max glanced at you, his grin widening as if he found your reaction amusing. "Max, relax, it's not the end of the world. I'm not a terrible person, you know," he said, his tone playful. You glared at him, your frustration bubbling over. "Shut up," you snapped, your voice sharp and cutting. Max blinked, but kept quiet, suppressing a smile. You leaned back in your seat, arms crossed tightly over your chest. Your thoughts messed with confusion and hurt. Jungkook never let you go home alone after university. It was an unspoken rule, one of the small but significant gestures that showed he cared. The fact that he was breaking that routine now felt like a deliberate punishment, a way to make you feel the weight of your actions. "Yin, this is all your fault," you muttered under your breath, not even bothering to look at Max. "Max, what? What did I even do?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Yin, just shut up," you shot back, your tone biting. Max raised his hands in surrender, deciding not to poke the anger in you any further. It was another day, and your frustration had reached its peak. Jungkook's cold demeanor was starting to wear you down, as he was giving curt replies to all your messages. But you weren't the type to give up easily now, especially not on him. As you walked into the classroom, your eyes immediately searched for him. There he was, sitting in his usual spot by the window, his phone in hand. You took a deep breath, your palms slightly sweaty, but you refused to let your nerves get the better of you. With determination, you made your way toward him, each step feeling heavier as his presence came closer. Jungkook didn't acknowledge you. He heard your footsteps but kept his eyes on his phone, scrolling mindlessly, acting as if you weren't there. Without a word, you walked behind him, hesitating for just a moment before your arms gently slid around his shoulders. Your hands interlocked in front of his chest as you leaned forward, resting your chin on the top of his head. The sudden gesture made him freeze, his breath hitching ever so slightly. You felt his body stiffen, but you didn't let go. Instead, you tightened your hold, your fingers brushing against the fabric of his jacket. "Yin, baby," you whispered softly, your voice barely audible but carrying enough weight to make his heart skip a beat. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, cursing himself for how easily your touch and words affected him. It wasn't fair. He wanted to stay mad, to make you feel the hurt he had endured. But the way you clung to him, your warmth enveloping him, made his resolve falter. Still, Jungkook remained silent, his eyes glued to his phone, though he wasn't reading a single word. You smiled faintly, sensing his internal struggle. You leaned closer, your cheek pressing lightly against his head, and your fingers toyed with the edge of his jacket collar. "Yin, you didn't keep chocolates in my locker today," you murmured, your tone soft and teasing, though there was a hint of disappointment in your voice. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. His fingers continued scrolling through his phone, but the small tug at the corner of his lips betrayed him. He had purposely avoided leaving the chocolates, curious to see your reaction. Yet, he kept his face neutral, pretending to focus on the screen. The silence lingered, and you felt a slight pang of nervousness. You shifted closer, resting your cheek against his, feeling the warmth. But as you did, a memory surged to the forefront of your mind. The stinging sound of your palm meeting his cheek, the hurt in his eyes that day. It made your chest tighten, and an ache you hadn't fully processed bloomed inside you. Without thinking, you tilted your head and pressed a soft, lingering kiss on his cheek. The tender gesture surprised both of you. Your hand reached up to gently caress his face, your thumb brushing the spot where you knew he'd been hurt before. "Yin, I'm sorry," you whispered, your voice trembling with genuine regret. Jungkook's body tensed at first, but the apology paired with your actions melted something inside him. He wanted to turn around, to look at you, to tell you it was okay. But he held himself back. Instead, he stayed still, letting you pour your emotions into the hug. You tightened your arms around him, burying your face in the crook of his neck. The closeness made him feel a warmth he'd missed but wasn't ready to admit. His breathing hitched slightly, his heart racing as he fought to maintain his composure. "Yin, please baby, forgive me," you murmured against his neck, your voice almost inaudible. Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself. He wanted to respond, to tell you that he wasn't as angry as he pretended to be. But before he could, the sound of the professor's footsteps echoed through the room. You half-heartedly let go, your arms slipping away from him, though your hands lingered for a moment on his shoulders. The absence of your touch left him feeling colder, emptier. You moved to your seat beside him, pulling out your books and pretending to focus on the lesson ahead. He could still feel the imprint of your kiss on his cheek, the warmth of your arms around him. He glanced at you briefly, noticing the way your brows furrowed in concentration as if nothing had happened. Just as he debated whether to break the silence, you shifted closer to him. The subtle movement made his heart skip a beat. Then, you casually rested your hand on his knee. The touch was so gentle, so seemingly innocent, yet it sent a jolt through his entire body. His jaw clenched as he fought the urge to react. He kept his gaze forward, but the faint flush creeping up his neck betrayed his emotions. Your fingers began to lightly graze his knee, tracing small patterns over the fabric of his pants. Occasionally, your touch moved higher, brushing his thigh in a way that was anything but casual. Jungkook swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the edge of his desk. He stole a glance at you, but you were the picture of concentration, your attention firmly fixed on the professor. His lips twitched, fighting the smile that threatened to break free. He couldn't understand how you had such an effect on him, how you managed to dismantle his carefully built walls with such ease. As your fingers continued their gentle assault, Jungkook's resolve weakened. His mind screamed at him to stop you, to pull your hand away, but his body betrayed him, craving the warmth of your touch. Jungkook exhaled sharply, shaking his head as he tried to focus on class. As the lecture ended, the classroom erupted into the usual hustle and bustle of students packing their bags and chatting. Jungkook sat in his seat, moving as he reached for his bag. Out of habit, his hand automatically moved toward your belongings to help you pack as he always did. But then, he froze. His hand hovered for a moment before he clenched his jaw and withdrew, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. You noticed his hesitation immediately, and something inside you tightened. The small, thoughtful gestures he used to do for you were now absent, replaced by this invisible wall he'd built between you. It stung. Without a word, you reached for his bag and yours, shoving books inside in quick, almost aggressive motions. You didn't care if the books were mixed up between the two bags. Your frustration showed in the way you worked, your movements sharp and hurried. Jungkook bit his lip, watching you intently. He could see the tension in your furrowed brows, the way your lips pressed into a tight line as you worked. A pang of guilt flickered in his chest, but he stayed silent, unsure of what to say. When you finally zipped up both bags, you stood and turned to face him. The frustration was still etched on your face, but as your eyes met his, it softened. Slowly, a warm smile spread across your lips, a smile that made his heart skip despite himself. "Yin, let's eat," you said softly, your tone gentle, as if the frustration from moments ago had been swept away. He picked up his bag, ready to follow you to the cafeteria, but before he could take a step, you reached into your bag and pulled out a large tiffin box. His brows furrowed slightly as he watched you place the box on the desk in front of him. "Yin, wait," you said, your voice tinged with a mix of pride and nervousness. You opened the tiffin, revealing an array of neatly arranged dishes. The vibrant colors of the food and the aroma immediately hit his senses, making his stomach tighten with hunger. Jungkook's eyes widened as he stared at the food, momentarily speechless. Each dish looked perfect. Yin, I made this for you, you said, your voice soft but filled with affection. He blinked, glancing up at you, his expression a mixture of surprise and awe. Yin, this is all your favorite, you added with a proud smile, pushing the tiffin closer to him. You watched him carefully, waiting for his reaction. The warmth in your voice, the hopefulness in your eyes, it was almost too much for him to handle. Yin, eat it, baby, you said gently, your voice dropping to a tone that sent a shiver down his spine. Jungkook swallowed hard, his gaze flickering between the food and your expectant face. His heart ached at the thought of how much effort you must have put into this. Jungkook, you don't have to do this, he muttered, his voice low and almost hesitant. Despite his words, he picked up the chopsticks and hesitated for only a moment before taking a bite. As soon as the flavors hit his tongue, his composure cracked. The food was incredible, the kind of taste that could only come from someone who knew his preferences inside and out. His eyes softened, and his lips parted slightly as he chewed. You caught on to his reaction immediately, the subtle way his shoulders relaxed, the faint furrow in his brows disappearing. It was enough to make a satisfied smile curl on your lips. Yin, it's okay, you teased lightly, leaning in closer, your voice filled with a playful edge. I know I'm an amazing cook. Jungkook blinked at you, his face blank for a moment as he processed your words. He cleared his throat and turned his attention back to the food, determined to keep his composure. Though the faint pink creeping up his neck betrayed his attempt, he stayed silent, pretending to focus on the meal. At one point, you reached for a piece of food, holding it delicately between your chopsticks, and offered it to him. Yin, here, try this, you said softly, your voice gentle but insistent. Jungkook froze for a moment, his eyes darting between you and the food. Hesitantly, he leaned forward, his lips brushing against the chopsticks as he accepted the bite. As the meal continued, you couldn't help but steal glances at him. Your gaze lingered on the way his jaw moved as he chewed, the way his long lashes cast shadows on his cheeks. Everything about him seemed mesmerizing, and you found yourself leaning slightly closer without even realizing it. Jungkook noticed. He could feel your eyes on him, and it was making him nervous in a way he wasn't used to. His fingers tightened around his chopsticks, and he blinked rapidly, trying to focus on his food. But the intensity of your stare made it impossible for him to stay calm. His hands trembled slightly as he finished his food in record time. His movements rushed. You frowned, noticing how quickly he was eating. Yin, hey, you said, your brows knitting in concern. Eat slowly, baby. You're going to choke if you keep that up. The soft scolding only made him blush harder. He swallowed the last bite and hurriedly placed his chopsticks down, clearing his throat as he pushed his chair back. Jungkook, I have to go now, he stammered, avoiding your gaze entirely. You blinked, caught off guard by his sudden retreat. Yin, what? Why? There's still so much food left, you protested, gesturing toward the tiffin. But Jungkook was already standing, his bag slung over his shoulder. He glanced at you briefly, guilt flickering in his eyes, before turning on his heel and walking away. You sat there, stunned and frustrated. The food you had spent so much time preparing was now sitting half-eaten, and his sudden leave left a bitter taste in your mouth. Slowly, you began packing the tiffin back into your bag, each movement heavy with disappointment. As your hands worked, anger began to bubble up inside you. You clenched your teeth, your shoulders trembling with suppressed emotion. Finally, you slammed your fist onto the table, the sound echoing in the now empty classroom. Yin, this man. Meanwhile, Jungkook was practically sprinting down the hallway, his heart pounding against his ribcage. He reached his locker and leaned against it, his breathing uneven as he tried to calm himself. His mind replayed the moment when you had stared at him so intensely, your soft hands feeding him, the way your concern dripped from every word you spoke. He rubbed his cheeks furiously, feeling the warmth that refused to leave. Jungkook, oh my god, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. His heart was racing, his thoughts a mess. You had him wrapped around your finger, and he didn't know how to handle it. As he stood there, his bag slipping slightly from his shoulder, he whispered to himself, what are you doing to me, Y or N? Jungkook opened his locker absent-mindedly, But the second he pulled the door, a river of chocolates tumbled out, scattering across the floor. His eyes widened in shock, and he instinctively stepped back to avoid the fall. For a moment, he just stared, his mind processing the unexpected sight. Then, a soft, humorous laugh escaped him. He crouched down, shaking his head as he began gathering the chocolates. Jungkook, ah, this girl, he muttered under his breath, a fond smile tugging at his lips. He shoved a handful of chocolates back into the locker and stuffed the rest into his bag. Students nearby began to notice the scene, whispering and giggling as they watched Jungkook fumble with the pile of chocolates. Embarrassed, he tried to act indifferent, but the faint blush on his cheeks betrayed him. Just as he was about to close the locker, a sharp voice echoed down the corridor, loud enough to make him, and everyone else, flinch. Yin, I said I'm sorry. Jungkook froze, his hand gripping the locker door. He slowly turned his head toward the voice, his heart skipping a beat when he saw you standing at the other end of the hallway. You looked furious, your eyes blazing with a mix of frustration and vulnerability. Jungkook gulped, unsure of how to react. The students around him fell silent, their attention now fully on you. Yin, why are you acting like this? You shouted, your voice trembling with emotion. I hate it. You began marching toward him, your determined footsteps echoing through the corridor. Jungkook stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding as he tried to process what was happening. You closed the distance between you two, your anger melting into something softer as you stopped in front of him. Before he could say a word, you clung your arms around him, burying your face in his chest. Yin, I love you, you whispered, your voice breaking. I'll never hurt you again. I'm sorry, Jungkook, it was all my fault. Jungkook's breath hitched. He hadn't expected this, your raw, unfiltered emotions spilling out so openly. Finally, he let out a soft sigh and placed a hand gently on the back of your head, his fingers threading through your hair, his other arm slowly wrapped around your waist, pulling you closer as if shielding you from the stares. The students in the hallway watched in stunned silence, their earlier amusement replaced by awe at the tenderness of the moment. Jungkook, shh, Jungkook murmured, his voice low and soothing. It's okay, Y or N, I'm here. Jungkook's eyes widened in panic as he saw you break down in front of him. Your crying quickly turned into heavy sobs, each one making his heart ache deeper. Jungkook, Yin, 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 he muttered urgently, his hands reaching out to you. You shook your head, still sobbing, trying to speak through your tears. Yin, I'm sorry, baby, I love you. Your voice cracked, the words coming out broken and desperate. Jungkook's heart clenched, and he bit his lip, closing his eyes to steady himself. He lowered his chin to rest on your head, his voice soft but filled with emotion. Jungkook, but didn't you want to end things with me? His words were quiet, almost like he was asking himself the question. Your breath hitched in your throat as you shook your head violently, pulling yourself closer to him. Yin, no, 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 please, forget that. I'm so sorry. I can't even breathe without you. I don't even know why I said that, you sobbed, clutching him tighter. Jungkook's heart softened at your words. He smiled faintly at how silly your words sounded, but he knew they were sincere. He gently began to caress your back, trying to calm you down. Yin, please, let's be like before, you whispered, your voice pleading as you buried your face into his chest, your arms tightening around him as if you never wanted to let go. I won't act like that again, I promise. Jungkook's hands gently ran over your back, his own heart racing. Jungkook, baby, look at me, he urged. But you didn't lift your head. Your face was still buried in his chest, and he could feel how wet his shirt had become from your tears. A soft chuckle escaped him as you tried to wipe your nose on his shirt, only making it more soaked. He waited patiently, giving you time to calm down. Finally, after a moment of silence, you wiped your face and took a deep breath, slowly looking up at him. Your eyes were still glistening with tears, but they were softer now, filled with so much emotion that Jungkook's heart fluttered. Jungkook, you love me, he whispered, almost to himself, as if confirming it. You nodded without hesitation, your eyes locking with his. Yin, yes I do, I always have, you whispered back, your voice almost trembling. Jungkook closed his eyes for a moment, his forehead leaning gently against yours. He could feel the weight of the moment, the sincerity of your confession. Jungkook, you're mine, you know that? He said softly, his voice tender. You get me, Yin, no one else. Your heart fluttered, and you stayed there for a moment, lost in the quiet connection. You took in a deep breath and slowly pulled back just enough to look up at him. The vulnerability in your eyes made his chest tighten with an overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect you. Yin, I want to go home now, you murmured softly, your voice almost pleading, wanting nothing more than to escape from here and find peace. Jungkook's eyes fluttered open, and a tender smile crept onto his lips as he brushed his thumb gently over your cheek before placing a soft kiss on your forehead. Jungkook, as you say, he murmured, his voice warm, teasing, as though he was willing to do anything for you. No questions asked, your lips curled into a mischievous smile, the playful spark in your eyes returning. Yin, and with you as my driver, you added, your tone light but filled with a quiet request. He let out a soft chuckle, clearly remembering the events of the day before, when Max had been the one to drive you home. Jungkook, me as your driver, huh? Jungkook teased, his smile wide and teasing, but with affection underneath. He ran a hand through your hair, making no effort to hide his amusement at the thought of driving you around. He leaned in just slightly, brushing his nose against yours, his smile softening as he gazed at you with warmth and something deeper than just affection. Jungkook, all right, as your personal driver, I'll make sure to get you home safe and sound, no problem. You smiled up at him, your heart calm for the first time in a while. Yin, no, you said, your tone almost serious, though there was a mischievous edge. I want to go to your house. Jungkook's eyes flickered in surprise, and then a smirk crept onto his lips as he gave you a sideways glance. His lips twitched, trying to suppress a laugh at your sudden change of plans. Without saying anything, he nodded and reached for your bag, effortlessly slinging it over his shoulder. Oh, he teased, raising an eyebrow as he led you towards his car. As you walked together, he couldn't help but steal a glance at you, his smile widening as he realized what you were doing. You always had a way of keeping him on his toes, keeping things unpredictable, and that was something he couldn't get enough of.